Welcome to Tech Smarter. This is the show where we talk with innovators, operators, and investors that are actively engaging in aging services and improving the lives of older adults. My name is Abby Ritchie. I'm the tech guru at the Smarter service, and you can find me right here every Wednesday talking with people who are in this space. And it is a very exciting place to be. I want to thank our sponsors today, Leading Age Arizona and the Smarter service for producing this episode. And without further ado, I'd like to bring on my guest today. I am thrilled to have Tom Kamber. He's the Executive Director of Older Adults Technology Services. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you. Happy to be here. It's really exciting.
Really exciting. It was last week or the week before, I was at Leading Age California, and I heard one of your colleagues, Ryan, speak and loved what he had to say, and then reached out and thought, why not? Let's hear from Tom. And Tom, for anyone who's not familiar with who you are and what you do, could you give us a little bit of a backstory on you, please?
Of course. Thanks for asking. I am a lifelong social innovator. I've been doing nonprofit work since graduating college in the late 1980s, 89. So it's been a bit of time here. And I've started different nonprofits focusing on originally working on the housing field. And then I got very interested in technology. I worked on a lot of projects in the mid 1990s around reconnecting communities, particularly low-income communities, with technology resources. And then I got interested in aging after 9/11 and started tutoring an older woman on tech in Lower Manhattan as we were building some websites to bring people back to the community down there. And one thing led to another, and I got excited about tech and aging and started my own new nonprofit back then in 2004 called Older Adults Technology Services, OATS, kind of a friendly name. And have been doing that ever since. And then along the road, started a different project doing work with Latin jazz music, which has also taken off and become a Grammy-winning operation in the music area that teaches music programs to kids in the high schools in New York. I'm based in New York City, but our programs are national.
I love it. I love it. Multifaceted, multi-talented individual here today. And, so much has changed really since those first days of teaching older adults, and the digital divide used to just be about learning how to use a computer, right? And what would you say are some of the biggest challenges that older adults are facing today compared to where they were back then?
Absolutely. Well, Faith, here in New York City, they call it the computer.
I love it. I love it.
The Knicks made it into the playoffs, so I'm able to use a New York accent a little bit. When we first started out, you're absolutely right. People were really focusing on, how to learn how to use the computer, and it was very much focused on the box. And I remember when we first started our programs, like a good social innovator, I went out and asked, what are people already doing? Can you show me curriculum, and what are people using in the field? And it turned out that the curriculum that existed back then focused almost entirely on the physical computer. It's so much so that I started calling it device centrism. It was kind of a word to kind of capture how obsessed we were with the box and the wires and the connections. And the technology itself asked the first 4 or 5 classes focused on learning the parts of the computer. You had to learn what CPU stood for. They wanted you to learn about your desktop icons, all this technical stuff. And of course, when you talk to 70-year-olds what they want to be learning, no one cares what a CPU is or how to do your desktop icons. They want to go online. They want to use email. They're interested in social networks and social in programs online, things to connect with information. So it was really a user orientation. And things have very much evolved since that day and age where I think people really were so excited about this new box that was sitting on your desk. And now there's a kind of cloud of technology around us that we're using so much that we don't even think about it a lot of the time. We hop in our car and the GPS turns on, or we're going to sleep and our Oura Ring is telling us how our sleep pattern is. And things have really evolved a lot. We've had to evolve at OATS from teaching basic PC computing. Back then it was Yahoo email. And now today we're teaching, of course, Gmail, but we're also teaching how to do prompting in ChatGPT and a whole universe of new topics. It's an absolutely new world.
It really is. And I know from my experience of working with older adults and teaching classes to them, I always found it so valuable to just be able to say, like, this is what this button does. This is what this button does, because so many people that I was working with didn't even know how to turn their phone off.
Right.
And so often it's like the technology is, it's handed to them without any manual. It's done to them, and they don't have the infrastructure in place or the education to really understand it. And what I found over the years is that older adults are traditional learners. Mm-hmm. They went to class, they took notes, they want to read a book, and like in the absence of that, they're really craving a foundation in which to build their knowledge upon. So that's something that we find is just so crucial, especially when you're introducing new things like AI, and what the origin of AI is and how can you start using it today, which is vastly different from a working professional.
I think that's correct. Absolutely. The pattern in general is that there is a generational orientation. I don't know if that's going to continue to be the case 10 or 20 years from now, if it's just that older adults, as we progress through the generations, each generation that becomes older is the generation that still wants to go back and read the manual, or if it's just that as Gen Xers and Boomers, we often had manuals and that was how you dealt with complex information. So we grew up with your users. I still have the user manual in my car, which I occasionally take out and look at when I'm trying to change the windshield wiper blades. And so I think we came up in a generation that was a little bit more analog in terms of our learning process. So we needed that basis. We needed to learn the fundamentals about how to operate this system a little bit. And then we were more comfortable growing from there into more complex user patterns. And so I think that's the overall trend. I'll also say, though, that as we've taught, I have learned that, first of all, there's a lot of people out there that are tech experts across the generations, but in the older population as well. I occasionally would be teaching a class or working on something and somebody will say, oh yeah, well, I was the guy that invented APIs or something like that. And I'm like, okay, well, you're way out of my league here. So some people are much more technical and have the basis and are really looking for more of the social context of how do you use emojis properly? How do you think about this new world of e-commerce or online dating or avoiding scams? And then there are also other people that really do want to come at it as a more socialized experience. So they're not as systematic in their thinking, and I don't want to discount their learning process, because older people, one of the distinctions that's very clear is they have, and now it's becoming me because I'm 59, we have a better understanding of how we learn because we've been learning for so many years. So when I was 16, I didn't quite know what my preferred learning process was going to be. Now that I'm 59, I have done a lot of learning over the years, and I've learned for myself the kinds of steps that are most likely to advance my objectives more quickly. That feature of knowing your methodology and requiring it to be relevant to yourself and responsive to your needs is a very consistently identified feature of older learners by the research. And frankly, it's a great opportunity as the technology has emerged, because we're now we're in the place with AI and different learning methodologies. We can do precision learning, so people can ask what they want and we can deliver that. So that's kind of the new era that we're in.
But do they know how to ask for what they want? That's the big question, right?
Depends on depends on the environment. If you're in an environment where people are discouraged, when I remember we first started out, there was one center that we went to in New York City that had a beautiful computer lab. Somebody had donated it as a legacy project, and it was gorgeous. It was 15 state-of-the-art machines with the best Wi-Fi they could have and smart screens and all sorts of stuff. But to use it, you had to go to the security desk and get a key from the security guard. And when you were done, you had to bring the key back to him. So there was this kind of strange lockbox dynamic around it. And it created this disempowering experience for people because, gosh, you want to learn technology, but the first thing you have to do is go ask for the key. And it's this whole sort of Fort Knox dynamic. When you're in a scenario like that, it does make people very uncomfortable asking or even pushing for their own agendas. There's a term called efficacy that a lot of people study here. But if you're in a place that's more open-ended, we set up our Senior Planet centers. We now run 4 centers that we've built ourselves, and we work with partners all across the country to help them design spaces. The center and the environment that you create can improve people's efficacy and desire to ask questions just by doing things like, when we organize a tech learning space, we'll organize the room in a big square around the outside wall and have the trainer standing in the middle instead of everybody sitting in rows. And the advantage of that is everybody feels a little bit more equal. The trainer can see what's on your screen, you can see what's on everybody else's screen, and help each other, much more collaborative. So there's a lot of strategic ways that we can unlock people's engagement and make them more comfortable asserting themselves in this learning experience.
Yeah, I love what you mentioned just a bit ago about having to get that key, because it reminds me of one of the most common issues when I was working with older adults and teaching them was that they don't want to break it. Right? Like, I don't want to break it. I'm afraid to break it.
Correct.
And, I would always say, like, the only way you're going to break this is if you run over it with your car or you drop it in water.
The top, right? There you go. Well, we have a question on our first class that I wrote this course in 2004, in 2004. And we had a true and false quiz in the beginning of the class just to orient people and get them kind of loosened up a little bit. And one of the questions was, if you hit the wrong button, your computer could blow up and injure you. And most people knew that wasn't true, but people weren't sure. I will tell you, because I taught that class many times, we would throw that up there on the screen, and people would start to say false, and then there'd be a little hesitation, like, well, is it true? Is there something that the computer can blow me up? And so part of getting used to this digital era is understanding the reality of these tools. And frankly, to be fair, a lot of people that are in the older population now did not grow up with these things as kids. They're not as comfortable with them. 60% of people that recently answered a survey from AARP just last year say that they don't think the technology is designed with somebody their age in mind, which means there's a mismatch in the design features of things. And so people feel a little bit alienated, let's say, and they're still getting comfortable, and understanding the risk is part of the process. We really need to make sure people appreciate that it's not going to break. And people like you, Abby, who've been teaching this work for many years, are at the forefront of that. But there's a lot more work to be done, and there's still a lot of folks that, as these new things like AI are coming out, or wearable health devices and things like that, now you're talking about something that you're getting your health information on, or that's interacting with you in a much more sophisticated way. It is important to understand what not to do. And how to stay safe while you're using it. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm excited to talk about that in just a minute, but I want to touch on this alienation factor that you mentioned, because there's so many ways today that companies and healthcare have set it up in a way that, like, you have to understand the technology in order to access your records. And it alienates a whole group of people because they're not fluent in getting online and finding out the information that they need. And I'm just wondering if you have any insight to why so many major tech corporations and companies are just blind to the fact that they are missing out on serving such a large part of our population.
I think it's probably three elements. The one answer to that is, I'm sure you're familiar with the term market failure. There are times where there may be an irrationality that creeps into the markets, where the most efficient and effective solution or good or service is not the one that wins the highest market share because of some dynamic tilting of the scales in some way. And I think that there's, in the tech industry, being first into the market is a big advantage. And sometimes having good branding and good associations with your technology will leap you ahead of maybe other solutions that might be superior, but don't have the same kind of capital behind them. And so we've got a lot of inferior products that are out there that are not necessarily optimized. Secondly, there's a lot of ageism in the United States and across the world, and people just have these negative attitudes about aging, which is a whole topic we can discuss today. But it really affects technology design and marketing. And so as people put this stuff together, sometimes they think, well, it's good enough for this person, it's good enough for that application, or they don't think about what an older person may be experiencing when they look at even the marketing materials and see that it's all a bunch of young people in spandex. And so we need to do a better job serving that population in a more effective way. And I think that, the final part of this is that a lot of the companies are there's not enough nuanced competition to drive better decision making. So we actually created a guide to technology design for older adults together with AARP. That's just for people that are designing new tech, help them understand how to test the technology with an older population, how to think about ergonomics, how to think about relevance to people's life patterns. Because 70-year-olds are not living the same life experience as 17-year-olds. We have to think a little bit differently about what we offer people and do a better job of serving them.
Yeah, 100%. In my experience working with some of the AARP Age Tech collaborative companies in introducing products to senior living communities for prototype, for instance, I've been able to guide and counsel them, because oftentimes people will say it's plug and play, which it's never plug and play for an older adult, right? Like it's never plug and play, or it's as simple as 1, 2, 3. And it's not like that. It is not like that. And then even within their marketing materials, it could be teeny tiny, like the font's really small. Who could read that?
That's
Why
right.
are they using the word facility? Like all of these things. And, it's just reminded me time and time again, like if you are going to create technology for this population, you need to be in and within that population, right? So
let me interrupt briefly, just because this is such a great topic. When we think about technology, sometimes, again, getting away from the old box and wires approach, thinking about the experience that people are having with technology. There's a wonderful book by a guy named Joe Pine called The Experience Economy that talks about how when we provide a product or service, we're not only providing the physical object, but it's actually the whole experience of the brand and the expectation, the emotional experience you're having with something, the ergonomics, the design, the features, how they're organized, how your user journey is structured through the thing. And so all of these pieces fit into whether something is successful or not. And if you have all this negativity about aging, or you don't know any old people except your grandmother, then you're going to be at a real disadvantage in designing a positive experience for older users with technology. And just as one example of it, a lot of tech that's designed for older people, or when it interacts with older adults, it immediately shifts into like a clinical framework and modality. So suddenly, what was kind of a fun functional tool that you were using to get some job done turns into this kind of threatening or surveilling, experience that suddenly you feel like you're about to be institutionalized. And for people that are in their 70s that may be grappling with independence, because the fear that we all have as we get older is loss of autonomy. It's the number 2 topic. The number 1 thing that older adults ask for is health. When they're given a list of priorities, the second one is almost always autonomy. When you're hovering on the edge of losing autonomy and somebody hands you a product or service that rings a bell around whether or not you are in a clinical environment, or you're going to be institutionalized, or you're going to have some doctor in a coat coming and looking into your ears or something, it makes the entire experience of technology completely negative. And when we ask why people aren't adopting things and how we can help, one way we can help is to get people to reframe how they interact with us and how they bring this technology to market, so that it's organized around jobs to be done. What are you trying to do with this? How do we kind of think like anthropologists and deliver you a great experience instead of a box wrapped around a lot of ageism?
Yeah, it's something that we're continuing to, at the Smarter Service, we're continuing to break through that digital divide and that piece of ageism. And one thing that we have found in the past couple of years, and you probably have too, because I know you've talked about the average daughter factor, is that quite often the average daughter ends up helping their parents with their technology. And this is a huge piece of frustration for them. And I'm just wondering from you, how does something like a professional literacy program like OATS directly benefit the family caregiver in this situation?
It's such a great question, Abby. And again, just flagging the fact that you've been focused on this, it's really refreshing to hear you, raising these issues. We have this massive unfunded mandate around caregiving in the United States, where one of the things we seem to have at least let happen for the time being is that as people fall into dependency, we're not supporting the majority of them. The majority of caregiving is done by volunteers, usually family members, who get pressed into service because it's needed, and the alternatives are quite poor. So, if a person doesn't want to do a spend down or isn't eligible for Medicaid, or can't get access to services at quality levels that are minimally acceptable, you end up with your daughter or brother or husband getting, dedicating often more than half of their working hours to taking care of somebody. So the technology provides us with a potential solution in this area because it can relieve some of the pressure on caregivers. We just did a survey at OATS this year asking caregivers within our network. Our network is called Senior Planet, by the way. So our website, seniorplanet.org, and all of the people that go to Senior Planet for classes and help, it's all free. Many of them are caregivers, and we asked them, what's important to you? What can we help with? And they identified a series of topics. The critical pieces were mostly around logistics, managing people's health information, figuring out how to get prescriptions filled, managing eligibility for various services that they needed, which turns into a nightmare for people that are not the recipient but a helper and doesn't always have access to the information, or is just being put through the ringer of some of these revolving door systems that make it difficult to participate. The other area that they asked for help, though, was on the emotional support side of being a caregiver. They were interested in learning to connect to caregiving support groups online. Many people don't have time to go to a caregiving support group because they're doing all the caregiving, right? But they can hop on for an hour on Zoom at 6:30 on a Friday, right? Which they want to do. They asked for that. And they also asked for a lot of information about how to do a better job, which is really interesting. They're pushed into service doing all this work. They're helping somebody that they care for. It's often agonizingly difficult. And reading the comments that came through when people were writing down the qualitative information made me tear up a little bit because of the pain people were expressing and the sort of stress and anxiety. But at the same time, it was also uplifting to see they wanted to know more about the treatments and how to get better services for the people that they were caring for. They wanted to learn more about how to do online mindfulness programs and music therapies and things like that they're providing for the people that they're caring for. And I was really inspired by the fact that the technology is a bridge to so many of those. I wouldn't call them solutions because we're not solving for caregiving right now, but enhancements to people's lives. If we can make people a little bit more effective, a little bit less stressed, a little bit more supported, let's do that. And our tech solutions at Senior Planet, for many people, are helping them. They're going to Senior Planet and getting classes around mindfulness or helping to protect people from fraud. Or we even have digital travel programs on Senior Planet where you can log on and get a live travel experience with maybe 100 other older adults that are on the Zoom call. And we'll have a travel guide and take you to the Great Wall of China or Lima, Peru, which I think was the most recent one. And you're watching the guide walk around with the camera and videoing everything, and then getting to ask questions live. And so there's this kind of social component to the work that people are doing. And again, all of that's free for people. We're supported by philanthropy and government and AARP and other corporate supporters. And we're able to provide that for people to bring them together and get that customer experience, and also for caregivers, something that you can do together with a second person helping you out.
I want to ask you about some of these monitoring technologies that have come out lately that actually do help caregivers when they're not there to see what's happening, what's happening with the person they're caring for, make sure that they're okay, tracking their behaviors and their schedule. And yet it is so important that with these type of monitoring technologies that an older adult doesn't feel as if they're being watched, but they're being cared for on a deeper level with dignity.
Yep.
And have you been able to access any of these particular tools in your experience?
They pop up a lot for people, and we hear about them. There's a lot of different companies delivering these services, and frankly, it goes all the way back to the 2000s, because I remember back in the days of GE Quiet Care and other developments that were taking place. People were saying home monitor is going to become the next, kahuna here. People are going to be on there checking out, how to help make sure your mom or dad are safe at home. Well, the problem with that is, as we started rolling them out and looking at it, and I was talking to people that were using some of the services, you're absolutely right, Abby. One of the challenges is it's not, when I talk to folks, they don't feel the older person, I'm talking about the families, but the person who's being watched or monitored, they use the word surveillance when they talk about it. They feel like their privacy is being invaded. They feel like people are making assumptions about their family dynamics that may not hold true in reality. So a lot of us don't get along all that well with our moms or dads or children or cousins or siblings, right? And unfortunately, those are the people that may be the ones we're relying on for some of our care and our decision making, but I'm not sure that we want a camera watching us go to the bathroom, right? And so there's a sense of how intrusive is it? How in control is the recipient of the care and the services? And are we really just serving our mentality as caregivers to the sense that we want to feel more comfortable or less anxious about the care or the risk factors, but we're not necessarily asking the older adult themselves who's being cared for if that's what they really want. So these processes are very fraught with family dynamics, with freedom issues and people's autonomy questions. And also, by the way, the technology, like all the technologies, isn't perfect, doesn't always interoperate well with the other systems that people have at home, does not always protect people's privacy through the transmission of the information that's being monitored. And so just recently, with the growth of some of the AI-empowered tools, they're less intrusive. Many of them use different kinds of sensors that may not be camera-based.
Yeah.
They can be controlled more as a dual operator control system so that the older adult can turn off a system or shut it down for a period of time if they don't. Maybe they're having their girlfriend over and they don't want their kid knowing about it or watching, right? And so there's a dynamic where people should be allowed to make some of their own decisions, encouraged to do that wherever possible. And I think we're in a new era of having to challenge what that's going to look like. The technology is there and it does work. It's just a question of now no one has really achieved complete market share where that's the sort of go-to in the way that people are using, say, Gmail for online email services. And until we get to that kind of decision point where it's the standard tool that folks are using, it's still a little bit in contestation. And I think we're going to be making some decisions about what consumers want. And I would like us to choose those with an eye toward what older adults themselves want as the end user and the person whose benefit we're really concerned about. That may resolve in a way that they are willing to accept a little bit more risk than some of their family members may want. And I think we should take that into consideration.
100%. And if you're thinking about the older adult and what they're most comfortable with, and like you mentioned, empowering, just empowering them with the technology, and if it keeps them in their home, that's a really strong case for having this type of monitoring sensors within the home so that they could continue to age at home.
Absolutely. We do an interview process now at OATS where for a while we were telling people in state offices, because we work with a lot of state broadband offices, we were saying, well, if you want to have an age-friendly broadband policy, you have to go talk to gerontologists. And they were taking notes and nodding their heads. And then I realized, like, when's the last time I systematically talked to gerontologists? I hang out with a lot of them at the American Society on Aging Conference and GIA, but I don't necessarily go out and do it systematically. So we found 10 gerontologists, made a list, and we interviewed them asking about what they thought the technology opportunities and challenges were for older adults in the current kind of generation. And one of the things that popped up very decisively was this notion of building information management systems where people could have access to their own information and the older adults would have a little bit more control over risk. And people said, there's this dynamic where everybody's trying to stay safe at home and we're building these monitoring systems around us, but at the same time, we're not tracking risk factors very well. I talked to a gerontologist who runs the gerontology department at Johns Hopkins, and she said, if you let me, if I can track somebody's gait, just how they're walking from, ask how long does it take them to walk 20 feet and track that over a period of time, it's an extremely valuable indicator of their likeliness to fall and their likeliness to become frail and potentially not be able to manage some of the household dynamics that are required for staying safe. Now, if you're tracking that and the older adult has access to the information and says, oh, geez, 3 years ago, it was only taking me 6 seconds. Now it's taking me 11 seconds to walk 20 feet. That's a red flag. And then one of the answers is, can you then be walking more or get a personal trainer? Are there things you can do? Or are we now at the point where you're going to need somebody giving you 10 hours of care a week in your house? And those dynamics need to be collaborative with the older adult using available data that we can now gather. We've got all the information available to us because of the technology. So the gerontologists were excited about gathering the data, but they talked a lot about making sure that it was a collaborative process with the older adults themselves and that we were able to activate around it. They said too much of the information we're gathering now just goes into a black hole somewhere. We're filing some form with the AAA about somebody's access, their eligibility or how they're doing, or we're doing case management, or we're doing, stuff on their patient portal. But when does the patient get a chance to look at that stuff, and how does it empower them? I'm going to make one more point, and then we'll go to the next question. But I don't know if you're familiar with this. It's a measurement called the patient activation measure, and it's the PAM, and it's a score that they use to assess how active a patient is in managing their medical information. It asks questions like, are you comfortable asking a question of your doctor or challenging something that they've said and questioning whether or not it may be correct, or if you want to get a second opinion or have them explain themselves to you? Or another question it asks is, do you know what every one of your medications is for? What's the purpose of your taking it? And if you answer no to some of those questions, which a lot of people don't know, it suggests that you may be a little bit more passive as a patient. And it turns out that being passive translates into poor health. And being active translates into better health because people start to make decisions and be more efficacious around their healthcare management. And while it's very hard to achieve healthcare outcomes directly, it's actually not that difficult to get people to go upwards on the PAM score, because you can train people to ask questions, you can train people to prepare for their primary care visits. The technology is available as a resource and an asset while they do that. And one of the things we've been talking about with some of our partners is, how do we use things like the PAM score as a measure of making sure that we're achieving progress, helping people be empowered, activated, and ultimately healthier and having better health span because they're using technology effectively.
That is fascinating. I'd love to take a look at that. Did you say that's on your website?
The patient activation metric pops up. We mention it periodically in some of the materials that we've done, but the PAM score is available as a validated measurement that people use. But yeah, people can go to Senior Planet or OATS, or if they email me at info@oats.org, I'll put them in touch with our research folks, and they can help you assess whether or not a tool like that's effective or useful for you. It's available. It's a widespread tool. There are literally thousands of studies that cite it.
Fascinating. I can't wait to take a look at it myself. It sounds to me, Tom, like you love to look at the data. Do you love to look at the data?
I'm a data freak. Yeah, I like it. I mean, when I was in graduate school, my dissertation advisor, a guy named John Mollenkoff, who just retired 2 weeks ago, used to say, before you run all your statistical methods, and this is back when we were using SPSS in a DOS format, typing in all the commands, he said, first look at the data tables. Take a look at what are all the data values, and look and think about, boy, there's a lot of people that are coming out like on a 10-point scale. There are a lot of sevens. Why is it a 7 such a popular number? And is that a modality that maybe we're going to see as we start to run some of our descriptive statistics and things? So I love looking at raw data and just kind of trying to absorb it a little bit, and then being creative about asking better questions from the data. Just one example that came up a few years ago was that during COVID, people realized that being offline was potentially a life-threatening experience for older people, because you were forced to go to the supermarket when other people could shop online for groceries. And if you had to go to the supermarket during a pandemic, we all know what kind of risk we were facing. So we learned that a lot of older adults don't have broadband at home and are not online, but there was no national data point that would allow us to understand the relationship between aging and broadband access at home. There were some studies, the census has numbers on how many people have broadband, but it didn't ever break it down by age between the 18 to 64 and the 65 and older population. So we did that simple calculation on every county in the country. And then we subtracted the younger population number from the older population number. So if the younger population was on it, say 75% of people had broadband at home, and people 65 plus in that same county, it was just 68%, then you had a 7-point gap. And it's an interesting data point because the data point becomes the gap, because we know they're all in the same county. So they have roughly the same access and they have sort of the same, socioeconomic environment. But when you look at some counties in, say, Alaska, there's some counties up there where older adults in those counties, it's a positive gap. The older people have higher broadband participation. There's other counties like Washington, D.C., where we were getting a 25% gap, where younger folks were absolutely dominating the internet access and older people were not, which is related to poverty and is also related to some of the professional dynamics of a big city like Washington. And so understanding how to ask smart questions of data instead of kind of passively just like letting whatever it is the census is sending you be the information that you're absorbing is a lot of fun. And I feel like it's allowed us to kind of create a data picture of aging that's more nuanced and more gerontologically informed and ultimately more actionable for us.
It's such a unique perspective. I love it. If you were going to give an older adult one tech tip, what would you say to them today?
Oh boy, one. I got to stick to one. I would say know why you want to use a piece of technology before you choose it. We get pushed into tech because people think we should use it, but if you don't have a use case, don't use it. If you're I'm a book guy. I read books. I drop them in the bathtub. I get coffee stains on them. I don't use Kindles because it doesn't have a use case for me. But some people who travel a lot don't want the whole armful of books. Their use case is clear, right? If you're needing a home monitoring system because your kid or your daughter is telling you to get one, but you don't feel like you need it, then you don't have a use case, and you have to have those dialogues and conversations. I think the decision about the use case is much more important than the decision about even the downstream decisions after you've decided to do something. So if you know that you need a piece of technology, like, as a stupid example here, but I'm into fishing and I have a dock in my backyard. I live in Long Island, and we have fish out there with a little light that the fish swim around. And it turns out that I often want to go out there and go fishing, but I can't tell if there's any fish there. So I needed to know if there's any fish swimming on top of the light without me having to run back and forth all the time. So I set up a Ring camera pointed down into my dock, into the water, and I could pull out my phone right here in Manhattan, and I can see my dock light. So that's a weird offbeat thing, but the technology followed my need to do something with it. And then I was able to source a technology solution to do exactly what I needed. And now it saves me some time and I get some enjoyment out of it. And I actually caught a fish the other day. So it's you need to be in the driver's seat when you make those decisions, and always be asking, don't get jumped into like somebody told you to buy something. We're all getting marketed at all the time. Yeah. Decommercialize it, personalize your desires and what you want for yourself and what you need, and then make the technology serve that.
Love it. I love it. Great answer. Thank you. Tom, thank you so much for joining us today. I so appreciate your wisdom and your expertise and what you've brought here today. And how can someone get in touch with you or find out more?
So the quickest ways are, if you're interested in learning about OATS, we're oats.org, which is our main website page. And if you want to email us, we're at info@oats.org. We're a nonprofit and, 501c3 tax-exempt organization. If you send an email to info@oats.org and say, I had a question for Tom Kamber, or wanted OATS to help out with something, wanted to partner with us on something, or whatever might be the solution, we'll get right back to you. We've got a whole team of people that are really active in helping build partnerships and programs. And then the most exciting thing that a lot of people are using, they go to Senior Planet, which is our program site, which is all free for everybody. If you're an older adult, you want to get a class, you go to seniorplanet.org. We have a hotline on seniorplanet.org. People can go there. It's on the front page. Just call the hotline number. If you have technology questions, we'll answer for free, do the best we can to help you solution things and understand what's going on. And then we have a licensing initiative, which might be of real interest to your listeners today, where any non-commercial entity, if you're a nonprofit that provides senior living or that works with older adults in your community, you have a senior center affiliated with your residential community there, we will license our curriculum to that entity for free on an annualized basis. We don't charge for that for non-commercial entities. And we have hundreds of modules of curriculum. It's worth millions of dollars that we'll provide for free to the local partners. We spend so much time putting together that method and that curriculum. We just want to get it out into the community. And right now there's just about 800 locations in 40 states that are using our curriculum and our methods through what they call Senior Planet licensing. So if you go to seniorplanet.org/licensing, there's a whole page on seniorplanet.org/licensing. You'll see what we do, how it works, and why a lot of communities and libraries and senior centers are signing up to do that. It's kind of a neat way of getting high quality programs right into your local communities that people can work with and leveraging some of our resources.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And for our sponsors today, Leading Age Arizona, thank you for sponsoring this episode, and we will see you all right back here next week.
Thanks so much. I was glad to be here today.